Welcome to Into the Arms of Morpheus podcast, a quiet story from history. Tonight, the water between. Close your eyes. The water here is a different colour, not the grey-green of the North Atlantic, not the deep, cold blue of the Southern Ocean, not the dark, heavy water that surrounds Antarctica. Something warmer than all of that. A blue that has light in it. A blue that carries the colour of the sky into the sea and keeps it there. Clear enough that from the deck of a ship on a calm day, you can watch the colour change as the depth changes beneath you. Pale turquoise over sand, deepening to green, deepening further to a blue that has no bottom visible in it at all. This is the Western Atlantic, the triangle of ocean that lies between the southern tip of Florida, the island of Bermuda far out to the northeast, and the island of Puerto Rico to the south. It is not a large piece of ocean by oceanic standards. It could fit inside the Pacific several times over without being noticed. But it is a particular piece of ocean with its own particular qualities, its temperature, its currents, its weather, the specific colour of its water in different lights. It has no official name. No line on any chart marks its edges. No harbour master logs ships as entering or leaving it. It is simply a piece of the sea, like any other piece of the sea, doing what the sea does. You may have heard of it. Everyone has some version of it. A name, a reputation, a vague sense that this particular piece of water is associated with things that cannot be explained. The stories have been circulating for decades. They are part of the background noise of popular knowledge about the sea. But tonight we are not here for the stories. Tonight we are here for the water itself. The actual water. What it is, and what it does, and why it is the way it is. The real thing, which is more interesting than any story told about it. The Western Atlantic has been one of the most travelled stretches of ocean in the world for several centuries. From the moment that the routes between Europe and the Americas were established, ships began crossing this water in both directions. Trading ships carrying sugar and tobacco and cotton northward and eastward, returning with manufactured goods and people and mail. Passenger ships carrying emigrants and travellers. Naval vessels on their various errands. Fishing boats working the rich shallows of the Bahamas and the Florida coast. Columbus passed through here on all 4 of his voyages west. He was the first European to navigate this water with any systematic attention, and he wrote about what he found with the careful curiosity of a man trying to understand something genuinely new. He wrote about the colour of the water, about the way the compass needle did not behave as it did in waters he knew, about the birds that appeared when land was near, and the strange green weeds that floated in great mats on the surface in certain areas. He noted these things and continued. The ocean was full of things that could not yet be explained. That was the nature of exploration in those years. You moved into the unknown, and you encountered the unknown, and you wrote it down as accurately as you could, and you continued. The explanation could come later, from people in libraries who had time to think about it. The crossing had to happen now. After Columbus, the traffic through these waters increased steadily. The Spanish built their trade routes through here. The great convoys of ships carrying silver from the Americas back to Europe. The Manila galleons making their annual crossings. The slave ships moving in the other direction. The British and Dutch and French followed. The Western Atlantic became the most contested and the most travelled stretch of ocean in the world for several centuries, with more ships crossing it and more at stake in crossing it than anywhere else. You observed, you recorded, you moved on. The sea here is warm. The Gulf Stream is the reason. A current of warm water that begins in the Gulf of Mexico, where the sun heats the shallow water until it is almost hot, and then pushes northward and eastward along the American coast and eventually across the Atlantic toward Europe. The Gulf Stream is not a narrow river in the ocean, the way it is sometimes described. It is a broad, deep movement of water, hundreds of kilometers wide, carrying an enormous volume of warm water from the tropics toward higher latitudes. It moves at a few knots, faster than most people expect for something so large. Fast enough that ships sailing with it gained a meaningful advantage, arriving sooner than they would have without it. Fast enough that ships sailing against it found the going slower and harder than the wind alone would explain. The early navigators of the Atlantic learned about the Gulf Stream gradually, comparing the times of different crossings and noticing that some routes were consistently faster in one direction than another. Benjamin Franklin produced one of the first charts of it, based on the observations of Nantucket whalers who had been using it and avoiding it for years without anyone having named it or mapped it. The current does not announce itself. There is no visible line where it begins or ends. The water simply behaves differently, a little warmer, a little bluer, moving with a purpose that the water around it does not share. You might not know you were in it until you looked up and found the stars in positions that did not quite match where you thought you were. The current carrying you somewhere you had not entirely planned to go. The Gulf Stream is one of the great rivers of the ocean. Not a river in the sense of something contained between banks, with a fixed course and a predictable flow, more like a vast, slow movement of warm water through a larger body of cold water, keeping its identity over thousands of miles, warming the eastern coasts of North America and the western coasts of Europe, shaping the climate of countries far from where it originates. The coasts of Britain and Ireland are warmer than their latitude would suggest, partly because of this current, which has been flowing since long before anyone in those places knew it existed. The water of the Gulf Stream is warmer than the water around it, and slightly bluer. In certain lights, at certain times of year, the boundary between stream and surrounding ocean is almost visible. A change in colour, a change in the quality of the surface, the kind of thing an experienced eye can see from a ship's deck if the conditions are right. Most of the time it is not visible at all. The current simply flows, carrying its warmth, moving its enormous volume of water along its ancient path. Navigation in this part of the ocean has always required careful attention. The magnetic compass, the instrument that every ship depended on for direction, does not behave the same way in every part of the ocean. The needle points toward magnetic north, which is not the same as true north, and the difference between the two changes as you move around the surface of the earth. This difference is called magnetic variation, and experienced navigators knew to account for it wherever they sailed. In this part of the Atlantic, the variation is close to zero. Magnetic north and true north nearly coincide here, which sounds like a simplification, but is actually a complication, because a navigator accustomed to correcting for a consistent variation in other waters might not think to correct for the near zero variation here, and the result would be a course that drifted gradually from where it should be. Not sharply wrong, gradually wrong. A degree at first, then two, then several. Over a long passage, in poor visibility, with no landmark to check the position against, a small accumulated error becomes a significant one. The ship arrives not where it intended, but somewhere nearby, which on a featureless ocean may look exactly like where it intended. This is how the ocean disorients. Not with drama, not with sudden violent events that announce themselves, with patience, with the slow, quiet accumulation of small errors into large ones, in a place where there is nothing to correct against. The weather here builds quickly. This part of the Atlantic sits at the boundary between the tropics and the temperate zones, where warm air from the Caribbean meets cooler air from the north. This boundary is not stable. It moves with the seasons and with the passage of weather systems. And where the two kinds of air meet, things happen rapidly. Afternoon storms are common in the summer months. A sky that was clear in the morning can produce a squall by early afternoon, with little warning visible from a ship at sea until the squall is already close. The clouds build fast, tall, dark-based, carrying rain and lightning and sharp winds. They pass through, and the sky clears again. The sea is rough for a while, then settles. Waterspouts form here. These are columns of spinning air and water that connect the surface of the sea to the base of a cloud. The same mechanism as a tornado, but over water. They form quickly and move in directions that are difficult to anticipate, and they collapse back into the sea as suddenly as they formed. To a sailor seeing one for the first time, a waterspout on the horizon is a disorienting thing. The clear boundary between sea and sky that the sailor depends on, suddenly replaced by something that connects the two, dark and turning and moving toward you or away from you, depending on the particular whim of the weather. And then it is gone, the water smoothing over where it was, as the sea smooths over everything eventually, leaving no evidence that it happened, except in the memory of whoever watched it. This is the weather of the Western Atlantic in the warm months. Not constant drama, not a permanently hostile sea, just a sea that can change quickly, that builds its weather fast and moves it through, that returns to calm as readily as it produces turbulence. A sailor who knows these waters learns to read the sky early in the day, to watch for the particular clouds that mean afternoon weather, to know when to find a harbour and when the squall will pass before reaching them. The sea is not patient or impatient. It simply does what its physical conditions produce. The warm water evaporates. The warm air rises. The cool air moves in to replace it. Weather happens. And then it is over. And the surface settles. And the stars come out. Below the surface, this part of the ocean is not flat. The floor of the Atlantic in this region varies enormously over short distances. Around the Bahamas, the water is very shallow. A vast, shallow platform of limestone rock, covered by a thin layer of warm, clear water, the bottom visible from the surface on a calm day. The colour of the water over these shallows is that particular pale turquoise that makes the Bahamas identifiable in any photograph taken from above. The light penetrates all the way to the sand and reflects back up, and the whole sea glows with it. A few miles out from the Bahamas, the platform ends, and the bottom drops away into the deep Atlantic. Not gradually, quickly. A matter of miles from water that is 20 meters deep, the depth becomes hundreds of meters, then thousands. The tongue of the ocean, as this deep passage is called, cuts into the shallow platform like a channel, its walls nearly vertical, the floor of it in complete darkness. This change happens invisibly. The surface of the water gives no indication of it. The blue of the deep water is different from the turquoise of the shallows, darker, more saturated. But the boundary between them is not dramatic. One kind of blue gives way to another kind of blue, and below the surface, everything changes. The shallow water holds fish and coral and the light of the sun. The deep water holds darkness and pressure and the creatures that have adapted to both. Both are the same ocean. Both are the same warm western Atlantic. The surface connects them without revealing the difference. A ship anchored in the shallows of the Bahamas sits in 20 meters of water, the anchor resting on pale sand, the chain visible all the way down. A ship anchored a few miles further out would need a chain thousands of meters long, and the anchor would settle on the floor of the Atlantic in complete darkness, in water cold enough and pressurized enough to be a different world from the surface, where the ship floats in the warm and the light. Both ships are anchored in the same sea. The sea looks the same from the deck of both of them. The difference is entirely below. At night, this ocean is very beautiful. The water here is warm enough in the summer months to support large populations of bioluminescent organisms. Tiny creatures, dinoflagellates mostly, that produce light through a chemical reaction in their bodies when they are disturbed. Individually, they are invisible. In their millions, they make the water glow. When a ship moves through bioluminescent water at night, it leaves a trail of light behind it. The bow pushes the water aside, and the organisms in the disturbed water flash their cold blue-green light and then settle again. The wake of the ship glows for a minute and then fades. The water churned up by the propeller glows and fades. A hand trailed over the side in the water would leave a trail of light in the darkness. Sailors who have seen this describe it in similar terms. The strangeness of it, the beauty of it, moving through a dark ocean that is lit from within, the stars above and the cold living light below. The ship suspended between two kinds of illumination that have nothing to do with each other, and everything to do with what this particular piece of water is. The organisms do not know they are beautiful. They are simply responding to disturbance, producing light as a defense mechanism, doing what they have been doing for hundreds of millions of years. The beauty is incidental to the function. It simply happens to be there for anyone moving through the water at night to see. The stars above and the light below, the warm air, the dark ocean glowing in the wake of the ship. The ocean here is not a mystery. It is a piece of warm water in the western Atlantic, with particular currents and particular weather, and a complicated seafloor. and a history of being heavily trafficked by ships and aircraft for several centuries. It has the qualities it has because of where it is, its latitude, its relationship to the Gulf Stream, the shape of the land around it. These qualities are understood, as well as any piece of ocean is understood. Things are lost at sea. This has always been true and will always be true. Ships sink in storms. Aircraft go down over water. Things that float on the ocean are subject to what the ocean does, which is move continuously and carry things with it, and eventually deposit them somewhere or take them down. The ocean is very large, and it does not keep the things that are lost in it in any particular order or any findable place. Most of what is lost is eventually accounted for. The currents move in predictable patterns and carry wreckage to predictable places. The instruments in aircraft and ships produce data that can be recovered. The sea keeps its records in its own way. And sometimes the explanation, when it comes, is simply the ordinary explanation. Weather. A navigational error accumulated over a long passage. Equipment that failed at the wrong moment. The ordinary limits of human effort against the indifference of the sea. The ocean is simply itself. Very large, very old, very patient, doing what it has always done, in the same warm water, under the same stars, without reference to the stories told about it on land. The water here tonight is warm. The Gulf Stream is moving beneath you, carrying its warmth northward as it always does, as it was doing before any ship crossed this ocean, as it will be doing long after. The stars above are the same stars, the same ones Columbus wrote about in his journal, the same ones that navigators have used in this water for centuries, patient and fixed, turning slowly overhead through the long, warm night. The bioluminescence flickers in the water, somewhere below the surface. The deep places stay deep. The shallow places glow in the dark with the light of living things. Nothing to explain, nothing to solve. Just the ocean doing what the ocean does. In the dark, in the warm, in the very long night. The water is warm here. The current is carrying you. You do not need to know where. The stars are there. Rest now and drift slowly into the arms of Morpheus.